Chapter 14, Lesson 4. In this lesson we'll talk about something called reaction mechanism. And the mechanism of a reaction is essentially the details or the sequence of steps by which the chemical reaction proceeds. So a chemical reaction may not go from reactants to products in one step. It may take 2 or 3 steps or 4 steps, and then these steps altogether are called the reaction mechanism. Each individual step we'll call an elementary reaction or an elementary process. So here is a breakdown of the possible elementary processes. So for example, a reaction can have 3 steps, and one of the steps could be unimolecular, the other could be bimolecular. So these are like the individual steps of the reaction. And the molecular just essentially represents how many individual reactants there are involved in it. So the molecular step has 3 substances involved. And then the rate, now these are like mini rate laws, if you would, for each individual step. The rate then law will have that many. Notice the third means it's third order, which means it has 3 reactants that must come together simultaneously. And that's kind of the breakdown here. So again, these are the individual steps. Now here it says that the termomolecular reactions are rare, because in a termomolecular reaction, in order for these together to combine and form a product, all 3 of them must collide together with the right orientation, which is extremely tough to do, extremely hard to do on their own. So these are rare, but bimolecular and unimolecular are the most common individual steps. So anytime you have a multi-step mechanism, which means you have more than one step, one of these steps will be what we call a rate determining step, which means the overall rate of the whole reaction will depend on that step, and that will be your slowest step. So usually you say if a reaction occurs in 3 steps, intermediate steps, one of the steps will be the slower one, and that's what affects the overall rate. A way to visualize this, or a way to give a little bit of an animation to this, is say there are some highways that require cars to pay a toll, these toll plazas, and if one of the toll plazas the cars are allowed to go very fast through, say they don't really have to stop by, they can just zoom right through, and say there's a scanner that takes their license plate or something, and the other one they actually have to slow down and stop, then what you'll see is that this step right here is the one that will determine the overall, how many cars exit overall, is kind of the idea. If that helps, use it. If not, remember that the slowest step is your rate determining step. So here's an example with an actual reaction. If you take a look at this reaction here, and if you do some experiments and determine its rate law, like we talked previously, we'll say that the rate law looks like this. Rate equals the rate constant times the concentration of NO2 squared. Now this squared actually holds the key to explaining the intermediate steps of this reaction, which means that the carbon monoxide, even though it is in one of the reactants, so we definitely need it for the reaction to proceed, it does not appear in the rate law. So if it does not appear in the rate law, that means it's not the slow step. It's not part of the slow step. It means at least there are 2 steps, and the step in which carbon monoxide participates is the fast step, is the idea. So we can say that the reaction probably occurs in 2 steps. We can propose a mechanism, and proposing a mechanism is a little complex, and all we'll have to do here is just analyze it. So we can say, well, if you remember, the rate law said that the rate is equal to the constant times the concentration of NO2 squared. This means that we see NO2 appearing twice in the rate law, which means there are 2 NO2 molecules that are involved in one of the steps, and that's why the first step is proposed to be NO2 colliding with itself. That essentially comes from the rate law, analyzing this rate law. And then we can propose a second step in which the product of these two reacts with carbon monoxide and forms our final products. And because we know that carbon monoxide does not appear in the rate law, we know that this must be the fast step. So kind of take a minute here and think about this logic. Usually the rate law will give you clues to this mechanism, and very often there's a way you have to verify the mechanism with other reactions, but the idea is, I think, at least apparent here. So why don't we practice with this same idea. Here we have ozone, which reacts with nitrogen dioxide to produce dinitrogen pentoxide and some oxygen. And we're asked to, we are given two steps, so we're given the mechanism already, and we're asked to kind of go backwards. And this is really what we're going to do for the most part. We'll be able to take a look at the steps and essentially put them together. Here it says write the equation for the overall reaction, so we'll have to put these two steps together. Identify the intermediate, and then say something about the slow step and the fast step based on the rate law. So here is our rate law. So all three of these are actually going to be important. So let's, our rate law here was given, well, before we do the rate law actually, why don't we answer the question. So first, let's go ahead and put these two together. And the way we can put them together, essentially, is cancel what appears on both sides and on opposite sides and combine what appears on the same side. So what we see here is that NO3 appears on both sides of the equation, so NO3 is out. And then we see that NO2 appears on the same side, so we'll have to combine these together, and then nothing else cancels out. So the overall reaction should show O3, which is ozone, reacting with 2 moles of NO2, producing N2O5, dinitrogen pentoxide, and oxygen. And this is actually what the previous example, if you take a look, said. It says that ozone reacts with nitrogen dioxide to produce these two products. So essentially, that's what we said. This is your overall reaction. So A gives us the overall reaction, pretty simple step. And B, it says, tell me the intermediate. Well, there was only one substance that got cancelled out, and this substance is the intermediate. Now the intermediate, by definition, is formed in the middle, you could say, portion of the reaction, and then is used up again. As we'll see in a minute, a catalyst has a similar property. A catalyst also does not change, so eventually it crosses out, but the catalyst will begin on the reactant side and end up on the product side. That's the difference between an intermediate and a catalyst. So a catalyst will appear here and then will end up here, whereas an intermediate will appear first on the right side, as it does here, and then appear again on the left side as it's used up. So your intermediate is actually NO3. And then in part C, it tells us the rate law looks like this. The concentration of O3 and NO2. So here's the rate law. So from the rate law, we see that both O3 and NO2 are involved together. In other words, these must collide with one another for the reaction to proceed, and that occurs if you take a look in the first step. And since that occurs in the first step, that means this first step is actually your slow step. It is the rate determining step because it is the step that showed up in the rate law. And your second step then, this one here, is your fast step. Otherwise, if the second step was the slow step, what we would probably see is just NO2 by itself in the rate law, is the idea. So hopefully this kind of makes sense. We're going to wrap up this lesson by talking about catalysts. And we had mentioned catalysts earlier on, and here we're going to get a little bit into the details of how they work. And they essentially work by changing the activation energy of the reaction, by lowering the activation energy. We've said before that a catalyst allows the reaction to proceed much faster. It increases the rate of reaction, and it does so by changing this activation energy. And the way it does it, it actually changes the way the reaction proceeds. It changes the mechanism of the reaction, if you would. So before, you can see here the activation energy was quite high before we added the catalyst. And then after the catalyst was added, you have two bumps, which means there are two more steps added because the catalyst is now interacting. But overall, we have decreased the activation energy by quite a bit. And some catalysts will further decrease the activation energy. So the most important idea here is that they decrease the activation energy. That's what a catalyst does. That's essentially the technical definition of the working of a catalyst. Here we show a famous catalyst, a very famous catalyst, and you would have seen this reaction in class. This is a reaction or a catalyst that converts hydrogen peroxide into oxygen and water. Actually, on the previous slide, I think we had the equation. Essentially, it's hydrogen peroxide producing oxygen and water. And Catalase is a biological catalyst, something called an enzyme, that's present in all mammals, in the blood of mammals, and it's able to convert a lot of the reactant to product. In fact, here it says has a very high turnover rate. One molecule can convert 40 million molecules per second. So these biological catalysts are usually extremely effective at increasing the rate of reaction, and they do so again by lowering the activation energy. And the way this is usually done, or one way of thinking about how a catalyst, the details of how a catalyst speeds up a reaction, if you were to visualize it, think of it as a catalyst. In this case, the catalyst is this probably metallic substance, and this catalyst allows the two reactants to be brought together. It essentially brings them together. So here it says there's an active site, and these molecules can then attach to the active site, and the catalyst brings them together. Because remember, one of the things that must happen is the particles must align properly, and they must collide with the required frequency, or with the required energy. So the catalyst allows them to align, you could say, in this case, and produce this product. So this is actually a transition metal catalyst that allows us to react hydrogen, and this is ethene, something called ethene. So hopefully that kind of makes visual sense. A few more words about enzymes. In the biological world, very often a catalyst is portrayed as being a special kind of a lock that you could say a key fits, and this is the lock and key analogy. Your substrate is actually your reactant in our case. Substrate is just a fancy word for reactant. Your enzyme is then your catalyst. So these are equivalent to the chemical world. And in this case, in the biological case, your enzyme is able to perfectly fit your substrate, your reactant, and then break it. So in this case, we're just breaking them. So in biology, enzymes are extremely important. Without enzymes, there would be no way for us to survive. Many necessary chemical reactions in our bodies depend on these enzymes. If they were to go by themselves, they would take way too long, and our body would not be able to function. And there's maybe one more slide, more from biochemistry, those that enjoy biology. This active site, usually on an enzyme, can be modified by another molecule, so you can decrease the rate, you can modify the rate in many different ways. But we're not going to talk too much about this. This is more on a biology side. But this concludes lesson 4 of chapter 14.